Hi, it's Mrs. Weston again, and I'm ready to carry on reading with our story, Charlotte's Web. We had left the story at a rather bloodthirsty moment where Wilbur had met his new friend. She was called... Yep, Charlotte. And what kind of animal was she? Yep, a spider. So, do you remember what Charlotte, the spider, had just talked about? She described trapping a fly, wrapping it up in silk, and then not actually eating the fly, but drinking the blood. Bit gruesome. Don't say that, groaned Wilbur. Please don't say things like that. He's talking about the bit of the story I had just read where Charlotte had been saying how she liked to drink the blood of the flies. Don't say things like that, said Wilbur. Why not? Why not? It's true, and I have to say what is true. I am not entirely happy about my diet of bugs and flies, but it's the way I'm made. A spider has to make a living one way or another, and I happen to be a trapper. I just naturally build a web and trap flies and other insects. My mother was a trapper before me, and her mother was a trapper before then. All of our family are trappers. For thousands and thousands of years, spiders have been laying traps for flies and bugs. It's miserable, said Wilbur gloomily, now sad because his friend was so bloodthirsty. Yes, it is, said Charlotte, but I can't help it. I don't know how the first spider in the early days of the world happened to think up this fancy idea of spinning a web, but she did. And it was clever of her too. And since then, all of us spiders have had to work the same trick. It's not a bad pitch, all in all. And by that phrase, it's not a bad pitch, what she means is it's not so bad really. Well, I think it's cruel, replied Wilbur, who did not intend to be argued out of his position. Well, you can't talk, said Charlotte. You have your meals brought to you in a pail. Nobody feeds me. I have to get my own living. I live by my wits. I have to be sharp and clever. That's what living by my wits means. I have to be sharp and clever, lest I go hungry. I have to think things out, catch what I can, and take what comes. And it just so happens, my friend, that what comes is flies and insects and bugs. And furthermore, clever conjunction Charlotte's used there. And furthermore, said Charlotte, shaking one of her 8 legs, do you realise if I did not catch bugs and eat them, the bugs would multiply and increase and get so numerous they would destroy the earth. They would wipe out everything. Really? Said Wilbur. I wouldn't want that to happen. Perhaps your web is a good thing after all. Now the goose had been listening into this conversation and chuckling to herself. There are lots of things that Wilbur does not know about life. He's really very innocent, she thought. He doesn't even know what's going to happen to him at Christmas time. Just take a moment to think what might happen to Wilbur the pig at Christmas and why the goose doesn't necessarily want Wilbur to think of that. We get the explanation here. He doesn't even know what's going to happen at Christmas time. He has no idea that Mr. Zuckerman and Lurvy are plotting to, did you guess it? Kill him. And the goose raised herself a bit and poked her eggs a little farther under her so they would receive the full heat from her soft warm and her feathers. Her soft warm body, and her feathers. Charlotte was at this time standing quietly over the fly, preparing to eat it. Wilbur lay down and closed his eyes. He was tired from his wakeful night and from the excitement of meeting someone for the first time. A breeze brought him the scent of clover, the sweet-smelling world beyond his fence. Clover is a little green plant, looks a little bit like grass. Sometimes people pick a 4-leaf clover and they think it brings them good luck. Maybe you've once picked a four-leaf clover. Well, thought Wilbur, I've got a new friend all right, but what a gamble friendship is. Charlotte is fierce, brutal, scheming, bloodthirsty, everything I don't like. Take a moment to think about whether you agree with Wilbur. Are those adjectives you would use to describe the spider? Wilbur's thinking to himself. How can I learn to like him, he thought, even though she's ever so pretty and obviously very clever. Wilbur was merely suffering the doubts and fears that often go with finding a new friend. In good time he was about to discover that he was mistaken about Charlotte. Underneath her rather bold and cruel exterior, her outside, she had a kind heart, and she was to prove loyal and true to the very end. I do hope that you have a friend, who has a kind heart, is loyal and true. Think about who that person is. I'll carry on reading chapter 6 now, and it's called Summer Days. The early summer days on a farm are the happiest and the fairest days of the year. Lilacs bloom and make the air sweet, and then they fade. Apple blossoms come with the lilacs, and the bees visit round among the apple trees. The days grow warm and soft. School ends, and children have time to play and fish for trout. Avery often brought a trout home in his pocket, warm and stiff and ready to be fried for supper. Now that school was over, Fern visited the barn almost every day to sit quietly on her stool. The animals now treated her as an equal. The sheep lay calmly at her feet. Around the first week of July, the horses were hitched to the mowing machine, and Mr. Zuckerman climbed into the seat and drove into the field. Now then, listen carefully to that bit. There's a really big clue in that sentence that tells you when this story was set. You know, whether it's sort of nowadays, in the future, or in the past. I'll read it again to give you a chance to think about when you think this story was set. You could even be thinking about what decade. Was it the 1990s, 1980s, 70s, 60s, or maybe even 1800s? I had just read Mr. Zuckerman. Oh, hang on, let me go back. Around the first week of July, the workhorses were hitched to the mowing machine. We'll maybe come back to that question in the next video. All morning you could hear the rattle of the machine as it went round and round, while the tall grass fell down behind the cutter bale in long green swathes. Next day, if there was no thunder shower, all hands would rake and pitch and load, and the hay would be carried to the barn in a high hay wagon with Fern and Avery riding on top of the load. You have to imagine a horse-drawn wagon, a wooden wagon, piled high with hay. It's all loose, not like today when farmers make hay into bales, square or rectangular shapes with twine round them. This story is not set in that time. It's set in a time where farm workers did everything manually. They did it with their hands. There were no machines. The hay would be hoisted, sweet and warm, into the big loft, the top of the barn, until the barn seemed like a wonderful bed of timothy and clover. That's timothy, a plant, not a person. It was fine to jump in and finer to hide in, and sometimes Avery would find a little grass snake in the hay and would add it to the other things in his pocket. I would not like to see his pockets. Early summer days are a jubilee time for birds, in the fields around the house, in the barn, in the swamp, everywhere, love and songs, nests and eggs. From the edge of the woods, the white-throated sparrow, which must have come all the way from Boston, calls, "Oh, Peabody, Peabody, Peabody." That's the kind of sound that bird makes. And you might be confused about the term Boston or the place Boston, because there is a Boston here in Lincolnshire. But what did we learn earlier on in the story about where it was set? In one of the other videos, I asked you about the questions sneakers and dollars, and that told you the story was set in America. And it just so happens there's a city in America called Boston. Maybe you could go and look on a map later and find out exactly where it is. I'll carry on reading anyway. On an apple bough, the phoebe teeters and wags, those are kind of birds, the phoebe teeters and wags its tail and says, "Phoebe, Phoebe." The song sparrow, who knows how brief and lovely life is, says, "Sweet, sweet, 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 sweet," or something like that. If you enter the barn, the swallows swoop down from their nests, and they seem to scold, saying, "Cheeky, cheeky." In early summer, there are plenty of things for a child to eat, and to drink, and to suck, and to chew. Dandelion stems are full of milk. Clover heads are loaded with nectar, and the Frigidaire is full of ice-cold drinks. Now, I don't suggest that you eat dandelions or clovers, but you will have a Frigidaire in your house, maybe full of ice-cold drinks. It's another Americanism. We would just call it a fridge. Everywhere you look is life. Even the little ball of spit on the weed stalk, if you poke it apart, has a green worm inside. And on the underside of a leaf of a potato vine are the bright orange eggs of potato bugs. It was on a day in early summer that the goose eggs hatched. This was an important time in the barn cellar. Fern was right there sitting on her stool when it happened. Except for the goose herself, Charlotte was the first to know that the goslings, baby geese, had at last arrived. The goose knew about a day earlier that they were coming because she could hear their weak voices calling from inside the shell. She knew they were in a desperately cramped position inside the shell and were most anxious to break through and get out. So she sat quite still and talked much less than usual. When the first gosling poked its grey-green head through the goose's feather and looked around it, Charlotte spied it and made an announcement. "I am sure," she said, "that every one of us here will be gratified to learn that after 4 weeks of children, let me say that again. Unremitting effort and patience on the part of our friend the goose." Let me say that sentence again so it makes sense to you. Unremitting means you never stop it. I am sure that every one of us will be gratified to learn that after 4 weeks of unremitting effort and patience, got it right, the goose now has something to show for it. The goslings have arrived. May I offer my sincere congratulations? "Why, thank you, thank you, thank you," said the goose, nodding and bowing. "Thank you," said the gander. I hope that's helped to answer an earlier question about what a gander is. "Congratulations," shouted Wilbur. "How many goslings? I can only see one." "There are 7, counted the goose. "Fine," said Charlotte, "for 7 is a lucky number." "Luck had nothing to do with this," said the goose. "It was good management and hard work." Now at this point, Templeton, the little rat, showed his nose from under his hiding place under Wilbur's trough. He glanced at Fern, quick glance like this, then crept cautiously towards the goose, keeping really close to the wall. Why do you think he's doing that? Everyone watched him, for he was not well liked, not trusted. What do you think the rat is thinking right now about those goose eggs that have turned into goslings? Look, he began in his sharp voice. You say you have 7 goslings. There were 8 eggs. What happened to the other egg? Why didn't it hatch? It was a dud, I guess, said the goose. A dud meaning like something's not working, something's broken. What are you going to do with the dud egg? Continued Templeton, his little round beady eyes now fixed on the goose. Do you like the sound of someone with round beady eyes? I think it sounds a bit scary, not very friendly. Oh, you can have it, replied the goose. Roll it away and add it to that nasty little collection of yours. You see, Templeton had an unusual habit of picking up unusual objects around the farm and storing them in his home. He saved everything. Certainly, said the gander. You may have the egg, but if I ever catch you pokey-okey-oking your ugly nose around our goslings, I'll give you the worst pounding a rat ever had. And the gander opened his strong wings. Final clue there that a gander is a male goose. He opened his strong wings and beat the air with them to show his power. He was strong and brave, but truth is, both the goose and the gander were worried about Templeton, and with all good reason. That rat had no morals, no conscience, no scruples, no consideration, no decency, no milk of rodent kindness, no higher feeling, no friendliness, nothing. He would kill a gosling if he could get away with it. The goose knew that. Everybody knew that. With her broad bill, kind of like her beak, with her broad bill, the goose pushed the unhatched dud egg out of the nest, and the entire company of animals watched in disgust while the rat rolled it away. Even Wilbur, who could eat almost anything, was appalled. Imagine wanting a junky old rotten egg, he muttered. A rat is a rat, laughed Charlotte, and she laughed a tinkling little laugh. But, my friends, if that egg ever breaks, this barn will be untenable. That means unbearable. Oh, in fact, Wilbur says, what does that mean? It means nobody will be able to live here on account of the smell. A rotten egg is a regular stink bomb. I won't break it, snarled Templeton. I know what I'm doing. I handle stuff like this all the time. And there's a picture here of this rat with his no morals and his beady little eyes. And you can see the goose. Charlotte and Fern. He disappeared into his tunnel, pushing the goose egg in front of him. He pushed and nudged until he had succeeded in rolling it into his lair. I love that word. It means like a den. He rolled it into the lair he had under Wilbur's trough. That afternoon, when the wind had died down and the barnyard was quiet and warm, the grey goose led her 7 goslings off the nest and into the world. Mr. Zuckerman, he spied them when he came with Wilbur's dinner. Well, hello there, he said, smiling to himself. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7 baby geese. Now, isn't that lovely? That's the end of the chapter, and I'm going to leave you there to think about why Mr. Zuckerman thinks it's lovely to have 7 goslings. Maybe you can think ahead and work out why that might be. In the next episode, chapter 7, bad news. What could it be? I hope you've enjoyed that part of the story, even though some parts of it were a little bit gruesome. See you again soon. Bye for now.